Well, as you can see, we're in a very change of scenery right now. Definitely not what we're used to. I'll be completely honest with you guys. It's storming like crazy outside, and that lightning is very, well, it'll throw you off. It'll throw off any concentration you may have. So we decided we wanted to relocate to the basement. Only this isn't Owen's basement. Isn't that weird? Sorry, I had to make the reference.
Garth, that was a haiku.
Whoa. Don't worry, Wayne and Garth are coming to Versus very soon. I just don't know exactly when yet.
I believe I requested the hand job.
And my laugh is even louder in with this room. It's even better. Okay, so what we're doing this week is we are doing yet another edition of Versus. Obviously, it's Sunday, so it's Versus time. And we're going to have an interesting battle here between some very interesting creatures. One of which, obviously, you see Gizmo, just adorable as all get out, and look at those monstrous things on the right side of it, or left side of it, depending on how you're watching this video right now. I covered both bases by saying left and right. So, there is an anniversary that I talked about in the last video. This is the 30-year anniversary for Gremlins as well. Just like it's the 30-year anniversary for Ghostbusters. And I believe A Nightmare on Elm Street as well. They're all at 30 this year.
I wasn't even thinking about when I got the idea to do this one. I wasn't even thinking about the fact that it was Gremlins' anniversary. I got the idea when we were doing Snow White.
That's rather interesting, and you can explain in a minute. So we can find out what happens when Gremlins battles critters. AJ, take it away.
Okay. Gremlins started as a script by Chris Columbus, who we just talked about last week.
Yep.
The director of the first two Harry Potter movies, the first two Home Alone movies, and plenty of other things. And he and Spielberg got together and they hired Joe Dante, who is the great monster movie loving director of like The Howling and the original Piranha and Matinee, which I know you're a fan of.
Love Matinee.
And he did the comedy classic The Burbs, which is one of my favorite comedies ever. And he's done a lot of movies, but as far as the genre, this is like his thing. And it starts with, as if you don't already know the plot, the Gremlins, but it's a review, so...
Slap right in front of it, right when we start.
So, we're in this town called Kingston Falls, I think it is. And it's this really Frank Capra town, like right out of It's a Wonderful Life, and Billy's mom is even watching It's a Wonderful Life on TV. And it's Christmas time, and Billy's dad is in Chinatown looking for a Christmas present for him. Because he's there trying to get his inventions shown, because he's this really... He makes these inventions that are way too complicated and most of the time don't work. But he's under the impression that he's a genius. Well, he goes to Chinatown and he meets this grandfather and his grandchild, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in this little store, and he comes across a box. And when he opens the box, a Mogwai is in there. Gizmo as pictured right here.
Yes.
As if you don't know what Gizmo looks like. We can't be friends.
Indeed.
So, he decides after much... Basically, without the grandfather knowing, the grandchild goes ahead and sells him Gizmo, even though he's not for sale. And he takes him home to Billy as a pet. I always wondered how he breathes in there. Because there's like no holes in it or any kind of breathing apparatus or anything. That's probably why he's so loud in there.
Yeah, I could see that.
And of course, we're introduced to the 3 rules, which are... they don't like bright lights, and sunlight will kill him. You can't get him wet, and you can't feed him after midnight. So, naturally, all 3 of these are broken before the night is over. No, the feeding comes later, actually. But before the night's over, 2 of those are broken. The first thing that happens is Gizmo accidentally has water dumped on him. And he has little fur balls pop out of his back. But the trouble... And you know something's wrong because Gizmo has this, oh no, what have I done look on his face. Like this has happened before and it turned out really bad. Well, what happens is those little fur balls turn into more of them. And he multiplies. But they're more mischievous than he is. We don't get a whole lot on exactly how that works, or why he's not mischievous and everything that comes out of him is, but that's just what happens. So, or how many of him there are. But what we do know is they run around and they cause mischief, and even though they're mischievous, they're still kind of cute anyway, because they still look like Gizmo, except the one that's singled out as the leader, which is Stripe, because he's got they all look the same, but he has the white stripe across his head. Well, unfortunately, it finally gets to a point where they are able to eat after midnight when nobody's around, because Billy's clock stops at like 11:30. So it's like, oh well, it hasn't. Yeah, this is what happens. It's because they have the one that Billy takes to the teacher to kind of do experiments on, and he ends up taking the teacher's sandwich, and then the others Billy goes ahead and feeds because his clock stopped at 11:30 and he didn't realize it. So it's long past midnight. And that causes them, the reason you can't do that is because that makes them turn into these disgusting, slimy, gooey cocoons that look like, when you read about the Iceman in your history books in school, like the mummified guy that they found that's like 50,000 years old, that's kind of what the cocoons look like. And when they hatch, they come out looking like that.
Yes, without sunglasses, of course.
Yes.
That comes later.
Well, a couple of them do, but...
Yeah.
And now not only are they mischievous, but they're also extremely deadly. Now, the interesting thing... And there's a really... you can tell that Joe Dante's all about the old school monster movies, because there's kind of an ingenious scene where... as they're turning into the cocoons and hatching, a scene from Invasion of the Body Snatchers is playing at the same time. So, then we're introduced to the other characters. We have, there's a bunch of side characters, we'll mention a few of them, like Mr. Futterman, who is Dick Miller, who is in every single Joe Dante movie. Whether it's an actual part like this or a small part, he's always there, and it's always great. He was also Monster Joe, the junkyard owner in Pulp Fiction, but his scene was deleted. Then obviously we have Phoebe Cates, who is basically Billy's love interest, who works with him at the bank. And obviously she's nice to look at because she's Phoebe Cates, but her character is a little bizarre and seems a little off. Because even though she's likable, she clearly has like really dark things going on in her head. It's mainly played for comedy, I think. Because that's basically what this movie is. Basically, it was... Well, I'll finish this before I get too sidetracked. There's a couple of things about her character that kind of stand out. Like when they're doing the... this is another scene that seems right out of It's a Wonderful Life, when it's snowing and they've just gotten Mr. Futterman home, so now he's going to walk her home. And they're having this really nice, Christmassy, snowy walk. And she's talking about how much she hates Christmas. And it gets into a conversation about how, with Christmas, the suicide rate goes up. And her actual line is, while most people are opening their presents, some are opening their wrists. And then, of course, the infamous scene where she just goes on this random tirade and tells the story about how her dad, she found out that Santa wasn't real the year her dad dressed up as Santa and was going to come down the chimney with presents, and he got stuck and snapped his neck and died up there. And he was up there for days, and they didn't know what the smell was. But yeah, the thing about it is, when it originally came out, it was kind of seen as like a family-friendly movie. Which is why Gizmo's like the face of it. He kind of brings in, families and happy and, Christmas and all that. Because we don't see the shadow of the actual Gremlin, of course. Nowadays, it's more thought of as like a dark comedy and kind of like a unintentional parody of the old school monster movie genre. So some of that's probably intentionally played for laughs. There's a couple of scenes with, speaking of Phoebe Cates and the Fast Times connection, there's a couple of scenes with Judge Reinhold as I don't know exactly what his relation is to Billy because they seem like they might be friends, but at the same time, Ronald is getting has like a superior job at the bank, and he's trying to show it. There's this line delivery that I love where it's at the beginning when Mrs. Deagle comes in and the dog gets loose, and Judge Reinhold runs up and goes, Pelter, what are you doing? This is a bank, not a pet shop. And the manager looks at him and goes, very good. Thank you, sir. There's Corey Feldman, who is basically Billy's little friend, who's the first one to find out about the multiplying, and that doesn't really go anywhere. Like, you kind of think it's going to go in a direction to where, like, he tells everybody and it turns into this whole thing. But his character just kind of goes away after a while. Then there's Mrs. Deagle, who's basically Miss Gulch of this neighborhood, who all the way to going to the bank and saying, "I'm going to put your dog down because he wrecked my snowman." And naturally, she comes to an ultimate demise. It's really kind of fun to watch when you see how much of an evil character she is. So a few more things we can talk about. There's a very fun scene where we finally see all the Gremlins. They're all hanging out at the bar, and they're just kind of doing their raising hell thing, and we see all the different kinds of them. They all look the same, but they all have different personalities and things that they do. Like, there's the one with, there's the one that thinks he's in a film noir, because he's got, like, the hat, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he's got, like, the glass of scotch, and he's just sitting at the table alone, smoking his cigarette very slowly. And the one that bothers him with the puppets on his hands. There's the flasher that tries to flash BB cakes. He's got the sunglasses, and he's got the brown coat that he just opens. It's just a gremlin body. There's the one that cheats at cards, so, for some reason, this is the only scene like that. In one scene, Stripe has a gun. And they're playing cards, and one of them is cheating. So Stripe pulls this gun out from out of nowhere and shoots him in the head. There's one that thinks he's Jennifer Beals from Flashdance, with the leg warmers and the sweater off the shoulder and everything. There's one dressed in drag, of course, which is kind of confusing when you think about it, because the Gremlins seem to be, like, asexual, and they don't seem to be specifically anything, so if one were to put on a wig and makeup and dresses and all that, I don't know if it's technically considered he's dressed in drag, but regardless, it wasn't until the sequel we got an actual female Gremlin, I think, which also could have just been a male one in drag. We'll never ever know. I also love the shot of the Gremlins where once it basically turns from dark comedy and, you know, fun, wacky mischief into, like, full-on horror, which is kind of a direction it's kind of progressively gone towards the whole time. We get this one, even though it looks obviously a little fake, there's really no way around that in 1984. I still do think the shot is pretty cool when we just see, like, darkness and the snow, and then the whole army of them just comes walking out of the darkness. Which is also kind of funny, too, because of the way they walk.
Yeah.
And there's, I also always, speaking of reveals, I always love Stripe's first reveal, because when we see him identified by Billy when they're still kind of cute looking, we already know that he's the leader. So it's kind of a big reveal when Stripe as the Gremlin is revealed. And his first big reveal is he's behind the curtain, and he pulls it back, and he comes out, and there he is. And we know that it's him because of the stripe. And the first thing he does as the main antagonist of the movie is take the curtain and blow his nose into it. It's worth noting when I talked about how it kind of progressively goes into full-on horror from comedy and family kind of thing. It's surprisingly gruesome in some scenes. Like, we have the there's the when the mom has to confront them in the kitchen, and one of them, like, gets thrown into the blender and it gets everywhere, and the one whose head explodes in the microwave, and Stripe's ultimate demise when he's in the fountain and basically melts into a skeleton. That's a really gruesome effect. And then there's the much darker moments, like with the teacher, where he was playing like a heart documentary, and it's kind of this looming, foreboding thing where you know something bad's going to happen, and it's actually kind of really feels dark for this kind of movie. But he's walking through the dark classroom knowing that one of the gremlins is out. And this documentary is still playing, talking about how much blood pumps through the heart and stuff like that. And we never actually see what happens to him. We just see his legs sticking out. Oh, no, he got the injection. That's what happened. There is a really funny death, though, that we don't see. There is a DJ on the radio called Rockin' Ricky. And he's on there, and he's talking. He makes a reference to the Orson Welles alien invasion thing. And he says, like, I'm really tired of these Orson Welles calls. Everybody calling in about these green creatures running around causing havoc. And then we hear a door open. This is Billy in his car listening on the radio. And on the radio, we hear a door open in the background. And we hear him say, and we hear the gremlins come in, like we hear the as they all come in. We hear him, his last dying words are, wait, who are you? You're not Rockin' Ricky fans. And then we hear him screaming for his life and the radio cuts on.
Nice.
So anyway, and the great thing that this movie does is, I love how real the gremlins seem. Like, the puppetry and everything that had to go into that. They look really real and really slimy and kind of gross looking. There's a couple of times where strings are visible, but for the most part it looks flawless when we're up close to them. I said, excluding the shot where they're all walking in the snow. So, yeah. And, of course, obviously, the title comes from the whole thing about... Technically, the Twilight Zone kind of started this. Obviously, the term Gremlins is involving... it's just, like, a word when, like, some kind of machinery or whatever goes wrong and there's no explanation for it. You just say, well, there's gremlins in it. Then there was the whole gremlin thing with the plane and the Twilight Zone episode with William Shatner. But because of this movie, gremlins have like a face now. And when you say gremlin, nobody really uses the term gremlins now as far as an imaginary thing that's just used to say there's a problem. They think of this now. So, yes. And, yes, the great scene where they go see Snow White, and that is basically, leads to their downfall. And of course there's a reference, we see, they all love Snow White, and it's also worth noting that they apparently, I mean, I know we see them in the projection booth, and it does make you wonder how they know how to run it. If you know the movie well enough, you'll realize that they're apparently watching Snow White out of order. Because when we first see them watching it, they're watching the hi-ho scene. Mm-hmm. But then, like, a few minutes later, when Billy and Phoebe Cates have broken in and they're back behind the screen, So While You Work is playing. But, you know, whatever. And, of course, because of that connection, we see one of the gremlins in the audience has the Mickey ears on. And you can't help but wonder if maybe Tarantino took inspiration when he made Inglourious Bastards, because the way they stop with the exception of Stripe, the way they stop and take down all the gremlins is while they're watching Snow White, Billy locks them in the theater and blows it up.
Nice.
I don't know, maybe that was intentional, maybe not, I don't know. But yeah, by the time he fights Stripe in the toy store, it's gone from kind of mistaken family movie to really dark comedy and parody of monster movies to just a flat-out horror movie. And the way that progression came was very well done. See, basically, it's easy to see why this movie is considered a classic now. So, I actually grew up more with the sequel than I did this one, but I've probably seen them about the same amount of times now. And both of them are great. The sequel is like a full-on parody of this one, and they call out all the different things that this one seemed a little off about. So they're both worth checking out, obviously. Obviously, as famous as they are, I don't need to tell you that, but just in case there's like one person out there that's somehow hidden from this his whole life. And then 2 years later, we had the release of Critters, which, funny enough, stars Dee Wallace and is about aliens who come down to Earth. Go figure. There's even a scene where an E.T. doll gets its head bitten off. There's also an E.T. doll in Gremlins. So, connections everywhere. Obviously, Gremlins have the Spielberg connection. This is just, doing its thing.
Yeah.
Critters is different. Critters starts off with it's like the start of a really bad Superman movie. Critters is intentionally like a B movie, though. We start, and it's a prison asteroid. It's its own sector. And imprisoned on this prison asteroid are aliens called Krites, which are what these are. And a few of them steal a spaceship off the prison asteroid and fly until they crash land on Earth. And they're here to wreak havoc. And they land on a farm in Kansas, I think. So what happens is we meet this basically farm family who's your sickeningly perfect little family, and you have it's right out of the beginning of, it looks like the beginning of 16 Candles when you're watching it. You've got the brother talking in the bathroom, the teenage daughter that's telling him to hurry up, the dad that's running around trying to get to work on time, the mother fixing breakfast. That whole family. And since the Krites are now wreaking havoc on Earth, they have to send 2 bounty hunters after them. And these 2 bounty hunters are aliens that are basically, it's like white, faceless mannequin heads that have like a green light around them. Like something from Are You Afraid of the Dark or something. So they go through basically all of American culture. And the first one comes across a rock star named Johnny Steele, whose video is all over this movie. So Johnny Steele's a fictional rock star, obviously. So he takes the form of Johnny Steele. And the other one's stuck with his green face until they go down, and he just changes bodies through the whole movie. And it's a really gross effect, too, when he takes the form, because we start off with the blank face, and when he becomes Johnny Steele, it starts with, like, there's bone visible, then there's muscle, then there's blood, and then he just kind of rebuilds his face. An impressive effect for 86, too. And then, basically... Oh, and we're introduced to another character. You're gonna love this. We learn that the teenage daughter has a douchebag boyfriend. He's one of those too cool for school guys with the long hair and the 80s jock types. This guy's played... And he's got a front license plate that says, "Too Great." The number 2... GR, the number 8.
Oh, wow.
This guy is played by Billy Zane.
Awesome.
And they have dinner with him, and then they sneak off to make out in the barn. And that's when the Krites attack. The first they attack the dad, and all they do is basically bite, and they can shoot, like, the little darts on them, they can, like, shoot out at you. And they're poisonous. So basically the movie is them trying to fight off the Krites while the bounty hunters are looking for them. And hilarity ensues. It's intentionally a comedy. As you can tell, it's one of those movies that knows what kind of movie it is. It's kind of like, it's much like Gremlins, it's kind of like a parody of those old school B monster movies. That you can buy in like 50 packs for like $1. You can actually imagine Critters as a black and white movie with shittier effects. I mean, if take the effects from Critters, make them shittier, and put them in a black and white movie. It looks like some monster movie from the 50s, is what I mean.
All right.
And it kind of knows what kind of movie that it is. So, it still has, those moments that are like, the obvious Spielberg influence when we see, like, the town and stuff like that, and the way, like, we follow the kid around and stuff like that. And it is, like, a genuine Spielberg feel they managed to bring into it. Maybe not as much as J.J. Abrams was able to grasp on it, but enough to where it's apparent. But they know they're basically making fun of silly B movies with it, so they go with it. One of the particular things that they do here that they're making it funny on purpose is when the Krites talk, they're subtitled.
Nice.
And as we've talked about many times before, when you're a PG-13 movie, you have one chance to use the F word, so you got to make it good. Well, Critters decided to do that. There's this hilarious scene where they walk up to two of them. They're only like this. They're about as tall as the DVD cases are, and they just waddle up to the door, and the mom's waiting behind the door with a shotgun, and they're talking to each other in subtitles, and they're saying like, "Okay, why don't you go in, or why don't you go in," or something like that. And the mom opens the door and fires, and one of them explodes completely, and the other looks over and like screams, and the subtitle says "fuck" with an exclamation point, and then it runs away.
That's awesome.
It's that kind of movie.
Sounds like it.
There's not that many recognizable faces. There's a couple. Emmett Walsh is the sheriff, who basically doesn't believe anything, but then has to, try to take charge when shit gets real. Lynn Shay from the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and then she was later famous for the Farrelly Brothers movies, and then Insidious. Basically plays like the police dispatch. She's really good in it and has a really funny part. There's the character where we have those cliches of the monster movies. Like, we have the one ill-fated cop that just happens to be driving around by himself, and he's the first one killed. There's the town crazy guy who knows that something is going to happen, but nobody believes him because he acts insane. And, of course, he ends up being right. And, oh yeah, another one of the subtitle moments is, you're going to love this because how much you love puns. Obviously, since they look like that, they can kind of make themselves into balls and then roll around to get to where they go. Kind of like what Stitch does.
Yeah.
So after another one explodes, two of them look at each other and they say, "Let's roll." And they get out of there.
Oh, my God.
But it's that kind of movie.
Yeah.
So, it's that perfect kind of thing. And there's also, like, we get them wreaking havoc, like biting the E.T. doll's head off, or there's one that dips his head into a fish tank and just eats the fish right out of it. And there's one, though, that, the only problem with Critters, though, is, even though I say this, it kind of doesn't fully... It doesn't go completely balls out like it could have. It feels a little minor when all said and done. Like, it does have those really funny moments, and it does have, occasional gore. But it doesn't really go into either one of those. It just kind of takes just enough of each and kind of does its thing, and then it's over. When I think this could have been really... Now, mind you, I haven't seen the sequels. I think there's 3 sequels. I know DiCaprio's in the 3rd one. Maybe those kind of... they probably get worse if I had to guess off the top of my head, but I do think Critters could have gone a little more really into the ridiculousness of it. But... Which is funny, considering how ridiculous it already is. But it's still really entertaining. And it's a movie... It's really short. It's like an hour and 25 minutes. And it's one of those movies you can watch again and again. But it doesn't seem to fully commit the way that Gremlins does. And Gremlins does everything, right? Like, it manages to be a parody while also being the genre. And manages to kind of seamlessly go there from beginning to end. So, obviously, Gremlins is the superior one, but Critters is really, really a lot of fun. So, that's pretty much what this is.
All right, so ends another edition of Versus, and next week we're gonna go back to what we did with the video on Friday, with talking about the most, I guess you would say, a gangster movie. What's not really a gangster movie. We're gonna take that and completely flip it on its head for next week. So yeah, you want to see a gangster movie? You're gonna get a version of two of those battling against each other next week. So, AJ, any parting words?
That's it.